It's 5 o'clock in London, it's midday in New York, midnight in Hong Kong, 2 a.m. in Sydney, 9 a.m. in San Francisco, and 9:30 at night in Mumbai. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. My name is Patrick L. Young, the IPO-VID live stream, Series 25, Episode 3. That is in the aggregate, episode number 147 starts here. Let's begin with a sad piece of news, an appreciation of William H. Donaldson, a great entrepreneur, a great American. He was as good as an entrepreneur, as a manager, as chairman of the SEC, and indeed chairman of NYSE in a distinguished career that involved both public and a private career, including, of course, working in the military. And he was posted to South Korea as a very young man. Over a decade ago, I had the pleasure of speaking at a conference at I was actually the European backing band to Bill Donaldson's Team USA. He was a truly great man, ladies and gentlemen, and our parish of exchanges is much diminished by his demise. Even at 93 years old, I think he packed in at least 3 lifetimes compared to the average nonagenarian. R.I.P. William H. Donaldson. On better news, ladies and gentlemen, all the best to our recent guest, Thapelo Tshole, who has been appointed as the CEO of the Rwandan Regulatory Authority in Kigali. Thapelo was, of course, our guest last month on IPO-VID 143. Then we get to this interesting issue, ladies and gentlemen. Apple, Microsoft, and Nvidia make a formidable trio at the top of the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. How soon will it be before we can have a $10 trillion podium of the top 3 US listed stocks? I asked myself last time I looked, they were about 9.84 trillion, getting closer and closer by the minute. Quite incredible. To put that in perspective. Well, actually, we're going to talk about that in a video later on. We'll have a slight break for that one as we look at these incredible numbers, but quite shocking altogether to compare the idea that the London Stock Exchange and Euronext Paris, which are neck and neck at the moment after Paris had a bit of a pullback this week, are each worth less in their entirety as stock markets market capitalizations than one of the 3 top US stock markets. Meanwhile, back in the world of Exchange Invest, exchangeinvest.com. Tune in there tomorrow. If you're a subscriber, you're going to get the newsletter hot foot early in the morning. Subscribe now, ladies and gentlemen. We've got one of our analytical scoops coming tomorrow. It amounts to what we call the competitive mirage, where a lot of folks have become very vexed that there's a volume battle in major markets, but we can only find the equivalent of poltergeists in the volume chain. Stay tuned as that one breaks tomorrow ahead of the conference day at IDX London for the FIA. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome, someone who is in many ways an old friend. We've known each other for well over 20 years. And at the same time, I'm delighted to be discussing a really fascinating stock market. It's one of those markets you may not have heard of, ladies and gentlemen, but at the same time, you're going to understand in the course of the next hour just why it's so vital we can manage to appreciate TISE, the stock exchange, the international stock exchange, which is going from the Channel Islands to the world. Cees Vermass, he has been CEO of the Channel Islands-based the International Stock Exchange Group Limited since November 2020. He was formerly CEO of CME Europe, CEO of Euronext Amsterdam, and head of cash markets for Europe at NYSE Euronext. Prior to that, and I'm abbreviating as always, of course, ladies and gentlemen, a long career. Cees spent a decade working in IT and program management roles within leading Dutch multinational companies in the Netherlands, Philips and Delta Lloyd Group. Cees, welcome to the show. Where in the world are you today?
I'm in the center point of the world in Guernsey, gem of the Channel Islands.
So the Channel Islands, something that I think a lot of people have probably heard of, but they don't know a great deal. British overseas territory. Fascinating place to be. We'll get back to that in a moment. But tell us a little bit about your career path, Cees. How did you manage to get into, first of all, you got into some very, very interesting managerial roles with your engineering background. How did you then get into finance?
Yeah, actually, if you mention it in a summary of 1.5 minutes, you make me feel old, which I'm absolutely not. I entered working actually early 90s as an engineer with a specialism in logistics. So I was meant to start to work in the harbors of Rotterdam, at that time still the biggest harbor in the world, with a lot of moving kind of parts and moving warehouses all across the world. But something brought me into IT and data management, and I started actually to really make career and use my knowledge about information management and data management, working for the biggest blockbuster of the Benelux, which was called Videoland, a big retail organization in music and images like videos, rental and sales. And at that time, we built a system already that we could, on street level in that whole zone, measure the type of behavior of the people in terms of buying and selling. And that has been the start also of loyalty programs with KLM, like Air Miles. So that is a little bit my background. And later in the 90s, I had my own IT firm, moved that away towards a bigger firm. I have been working for a CME, Computer Management Group, which became Logica, and a very successful British-Dutch IT firm. And they brought me actually into the Amsterdam exchanges because they needed help there in order to phase out open outcry floors and to create an open access system for their stock market at a moment that ABN AMRO still owned 28% of the activity of the Amsterdam market. And if they had a glitch in their banking system, the exchange was closing. Can you imagine? 1998 it was.
That's quite incredible, actually, but not surprising when you look back to those days. And in fact, I mean, 1998 is a really, really fascinating time because we were just starting to get this awakening of people that they were going to have to do something about computerization and do it in the front office. There'd been moves in the back office for a while. It must have been very interesting. So you came into the Amsterdam Stock Exchange at that stage. Was there a lot of resistance to trying to move the market electronic?
There was, but as always, and I although I left the country a long time ago, I'm a big promoter of the Dutch kind of mentality. It's not so difficult to persuade them to move forward and to share, how the world in the future is going to look like. So at that time, it was easier than the challenges they are facing now, I must admit. But I think, people want to do business. And if you can increase the volume of the exchange and increase the possibility to make more money, there's not a Dutchman or a Dutch woman who is saying no to these kind of opportunities.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. Certainly, I think the roots of mercantile commerce are definitely buried deep in the Dutch psyche. And that's why, of course, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange has such a great history. In fact, just a few weeks ago, we had Confusion de Confusiones as one of our books of the week, because that's a fabulous tale of the stock market that's still valid today and written in 1700s by Joseph de la Vega from his existence on the floor there. So, okay, you get into Euronext. I think it's reasonable to presume that the going electronic went quite well, because ultimately you ended up running the Dutch stock market.
Yeah, well, when we opened up or digitized the Amsterdam stock market, actually then the discussion started about creating this kind of super platform in Europe, and that ended up to create Euronext. And it was even the man Jean-François Théodore via my own sponsor George Muller, who brought me on board in the international organization. And there's where I worked with good friends in the industry. And you had him recently also in your podcast, Roland Belgarde and the whole crew. Obviously, we have been working there like brothers on the success of Euronext as it still stands today.
Yeah, and actually, yes, you're right. I mean, Roland was in great form the other week. He was talking to us from Saudi Arabia, all about the Tadawul there. And George Muller, I mean, it's interesting, I think somewhat of a slightly forgotten man maybe right at this point in time, but he did so much for the creation and benefit of not just the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, but overall the growth of Euronext in the early era alongside Jean-François Théodore. A very, very good man, George Muller, and someone who did a lot for markets.
Yes, don't forget, I've been listening to Roland, and he was right. We created a market with 4 markets.
Yeah.
So the Paris Bourse, Brussels Exchange, Amsterdam Exchanges, and Portugal. But actually, it was George who brought in Live from London, and that was really a breakthrough because he had to pass there, and he
yes.
related there. Yeah.
Well, of course, it was very interesting because, I mean, I was on both the LTOM, the London Trade Options Market floor, and the live floor. And let's face it, the London options markets, whether it was LTOM or the options side of life, would never have gone anywhere if it hadn't been for the incredible deluge of Dutchmen that we received. I mean, not just the capital and the companies, the Van der Meulens and the CAS clearers and so on, but actually also the incredible number of relatively small through large market making and prop firms that really made a huge impact on the success of life. And I think that's something that to this day people don't realize, because of course the advantage was that in Amsterdam, you'd had the EOE as it originally was, wasn't it? I mean, that had been going since essentially the same time as Chicago Board Options Exchange, which a lot of people don't realize in the mid-70s.
78,
yeah.
Option exchange. It was, we called Amsterdam like Chicago on the Amstel, which is the little river which is going through Amsterdam.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a Chicago model, and it's still actually very strong. It's proven to be very strong still until today.
Yeah, no, it's quite incredible. Yes, and I think what SIBO debuted in like 74, 75, I think, and EOEX comes just slightly later in 78 or somewhere thereabouts. They're very, very close together. It's quite amazing altogether. And I'm delighted to see that we've got a lovely message from part of your fan club in the Netherlands. Hi, Cees. Dutch mentality it is, says Lot Kaiser. Thank you very much. Cheers, Lot. Really appreciate it. No, I agree with you. I couldn't agree more. I think markets the world over have hugely benefited from that Dutch mentality from start to finish. So, I mean, you reached the end of a chapter with Euronext, and then you moved on and you came to London for the first time full-time. You'd spent a lot of time in London, of course, as the head of the Amsterdam Exchange and the head of Euronext Amsterdam and so on, and in charge of listings for the Euronext franchises in Europe. But what was that like, coming to CME Europe, a new exchange with quite an aggressive brief in futures and options?
Yeah, but what a fantastic company, to be honest. First of all, Euronext came to a natural end. We have been building, and we wanted to conquer the world. We have been doing projects from the US until Asia. But at a certain moment, our shareholders pushed us to split up the company, and we were sold to ICE, and ICE brought Euronext back into Europe as a federal kind of model. And that was a time for me, actually, after 16 years of a great journey to go and to continue to work with the Americans. And it was at that time that Fufende Gill, the CEO of CME Group in Chicago, we have been building a good relationship, and he asked me in order to continue a just started venue in London, CME Europe, who together with CME Clearing Europe, big ambition in order to put a footprint of the future markets in Europe, and that's what we did. So. Yeah, that's what a kind of a new breed for me. But again, what a fantastic company. I remember that the moment I moved indefinitely to London for CME Group, that the likes like Xavier Rollet mentioned, well, Cees, finally, welcome in London. Finally, you enter a real big company, a big exchange. In a sense, and he meant it very genuinely, I think, CME Group was just 20 times bigger than Euronext. I haven't seen something like that before. It's massive. Opening a market in Japan and closing it in California hours. That was really a kind of global liquidity moving over Earth.
Yes.
And that was a fantastic experience. And I had a great team. We had 200 people with William Nottenbelt in London from one new chains in the city that was anyway on itself already an adventure, and we built actually 4 asset classes in a time frame of 3 to 4 years. But, then there was a management change. Terry Duffy took over, still very good relationship with me, but he had a different view, and he wanted to go quicker and to acquire a company in Europe or outside of the US in order to move faster. So we decided to take an exit and to wind down CME Europe and CME Clearing Europe, and to, it left over with the acquisition of Next, as you know.
Right. Yes, indeed, which was the acquisition of Michael Spencer's fascinating interdealer broker business, which had a lot of, at least you acquired all of the electronic platforms and markets, and obviously it had a huge synergy because they had such a big business in, for example, US Treasury bond brokerage, et cetera, which delivered amazing a number of synergies for the potential of CME Group, but yes, rather changed the face of how that worked. So you reach the end of the chapter with CME. Now, I've got to say, all the way up to here, I can see a very logical progression, but it's difficult to suddenly go from here and then enter the conversation and go, how did you end up in Guernsey? I mean, that does seem to be somewhat of a slight diversion. So how did that come around in 2020?
Well, like anyone else in life, there was also time to take kind of a break. Was it not for myself? Because I'm still an overflow of energy, as you potentially can read, that it doesn't go away. And I've been very active, but my parents needed help. And that is just a stage in life where you have to commit yourself. So I went back to the Netherlands, took care of my parents at the end of their life. And after that period, I moved back to London. And then the COVID started, and I was locked down actually in a flat in Fulham. And then I got in contact with one of the most successful hedge fund managers in London, John Moulton, in the Channel Islands.
Okay.
And he was chair of the International Stock Exchange, and he needed post-Brexit someone, a veteran of the industry, in order to help TISE stepping up. And that's what I did. So I fled out of Fulham into the Channel Islands, where actually in the beginning, in the starting period that I came here, there was no COVID actually. Pubs were open, restaurants were open. I didn't have any relationships or friends here, but at least I could live my life as I wanted.
You could live a normal, civilized existence. Yeah. So the UK viewers obviously know quite a lot about the Channel Islands. I mean, they're slightly closer to France than they are to the UK, but not by much. They consist of, well, essentially three very major islands: Alderney, Guernsey, and Sark. They have some fascinating quirks to their governance, particularly in Sark, which has always fascinated me from start to finish. The Channel Islands Stock Exchange, John Moulton, he's a household name in venture capital, private equity, hedge funds in the UK. He created this market, and it's somewhat different to what one might call the conventional exchange. Say, for example, you had at the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. Explain to us a little bit about the history and the development, and in fact, how the Channel Islands Stock Exchange works, now the International Stock Exchange.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, Patrick, but I have to correct you. It is not John Moulton who created this market.
Oh, my bad.
Actually, there's more history around the Channel Islands Stock Exchange, which was the name before International Stock Exchange. That started in 1998 already.
Right.
And they have been building a decent, sizable business around funds, listed funds, which actually, after the credit crisis in 2008, collapsed. And they had to start all over again, in a way. And I think somewhere in the years after, there's where John Moulton stepped in, reformed the market, renamed it in the International Stock Exchange, made it a listed entity on their own exchange, created an equity, a kind of mini market, call it a mini AIM kind of market for entrepreneurial local companies, but also they try to go to the Manchester and Birmingham area in order to get growth companies on the stock exchange, and at the same time built an outstanding model for debt securities and the bonds market, where actually we are thankful for to bring us our success as today. So we created a niche in the international market, and although I think you can't compare us completely to the European kind of bond markets, in a way you can and in a way you can't, but we are the fourth bond market of Europe, with a total market value of approximately 700 billion financed capital into corporates in the UK and the EU zone. It's unbelievable.
Yes, it's quite incredible, given the fact that, I mean, frankly, a lot of people haven't heard of you. And I mean, that's partly because of the kinds of specialist products that you essentially deal in, so they don't necessarily hit the retail domain. Explain to us a little bit how the modern market works. I mean, you're very much focused on primary listings, but you do have a secondary facility, right?
We have a secondary facility, but actually we hardly, or we don't use it for our debt securities. thing is that we are, for instance, we took the market in Europe fully for high yield bonds on exchange. You don't find them anywhere else. We list all kinds of complex debt structures, but what is most important is just the facility which is taking place here with a very talented team, with very quick response time, high quality. We can list, if we have a complete kind of file from the issuer or the sponsor company, we can list in a few days. That's the type of market we operate in. You see the same, by the way, in Dublin or in Luxembourg or in Vienna. But we do the technical kind of more complex listings. And, we just carved in and we built an ecosystem over the last 10 years where people, the issuers, banks, law firms, they know where to find us. And just we keep on growing. If I just relate it to my own journey, 3 years or 3.5 years in the Channel Islands, I think we had a market value of less than 320 billion. Now it's 700 billion. If you look at the register on the market itself, I think we have now an ongoing kind of growth of official lists of almost 4,400 listings. And don't forget that all these kind of listings, they give recurrent income. So financially, we do better and better and better. And this is I say to my friends a lot, it's difficult to access, obviously, this market, but becoming a shareholder of TISE is better than crypto.
Well, I certainly think it has a lot of steady, good growth prospect, which definitely you can't say of crypto, which could be definitely something where you're going to all or nothing in many sort of respects. And it's fascinating because, you hit the nail on the head here. I mean, you've got just remind me what those numbers are. How many bonds and how many stocks have you got listed at the moment?
No, it's roughly 4,400 bonds, and that is 98% of our
business. That's incredible, but it's still incredible.
They have a maturity from 4 to 7 years, right? And the thing is, I always get the question about, how sticky is that business? Because you think that within 7 years these bonds are disappearing from the market. Not true. It's mostly or predominantly financed by private money, which is a sector which became very big over the last 15 years. But what is in reality happening is that it is allocated to companies. You and I know there are global companies, there are international companies on exchange, off exchange, and they come here just to be financed or refinanced or restructured. They know how to find this. And what happens during the maturity of these bonds is just, during that process, and the journey the company is making is that they have new M&A. There are new shareholders on board. They withdraw, their listing. Or partially withdraw them. They refinance and they put it back. There you go for another 7 years. It is very, very, very sticky business. It's amazing.
It's a little bit like the old story about stock exchange technology providers. Everybody goes, oh, it's a 7-year cycle, it must be ruthlessly bad. Whereas actually, if you service the customer well over 7 years, you know them so well that by the time you get to year 6, you basically can sit down and have dinner, spend a few weeks negotiating, talking about something, and you get another 7-year extension, because the difficulty of moving is tough. And certainly the service standards you've delivered are incredible. I'm quite interested actually in one little thing, because obviously in the European Union, there have been a lot of new prospectus regulations came in where regulators have got fairly hefty oversight of prospectuses as they arrive. How does that work for you with very stringent, but nonetheless independent financial regulators in the Channel Islands?
First of all, we are not diverting away from a regulated world. I have seen, and work with regulators in the continent, and also in the UK and in the US. And I think there's not that much difference, but there's just more flexibility. We are outside. We have been always outside of the EU and always outside of the UK. That became a bit more complex post-Brexit, but still, we are outside of the UK. And investors know to find us. We have a good kind of reputation. And we can just be a little bit more flexible around the ruling of market abuse regulations like MAR, or the new regulations which is kicking in the 1st of January in the coming year, CSDR, where there's an obligation to put yourself in a depository. In an area like Europe, that's just a kind of curtain or with a kind of a blanket which they throw over the market. And that's where you see the difference. We
Mm-hmm.
can be more flexible and apply it on the type of product which is coming to our market. And that is what investors like and issuers like. And this makes it strong. But we work within the framework of IOSCO.
Right.
And our regulator, the GFSC here, is also very strict in following the rules and the risk framework we have been setting.
No, and I think you make a fair point, because it's not in any way because the GFSC are a light touch regulator. I'd actually say I may say this, you probably can't possibly comment, but I would have said they're a rather stringent regulator in every possible respect in terms of setting the risk parameters and so on. They're certainly a very, like so many of the small British overseas territories, they may be small in geography, but their financial regulatory clout can be very, very significant thanks to the ties to the UK and so on. Actually, we've got a very interesting question just emerged from John Folk. Hello, John. Lovely to see you. I hope it's sunny wherever you are in the world. John Folk asking, are many of the bonds with Guernsey registered companies, or are they a mix of Jersey, Guernsey, Ireland, Luxembourg, etc.? An interesting question.
Actually, it's a very interesting question, but this is absolutely not a local market, John. This is an international market, and we see as many as entities from US firms as European firms and UK firms. It's not Guernsey or Jersey based. What is actually the trick is that most of our sponsors and the relationship networks are coming from the financial markets of Guernsey and mainly Jersey in the bond world. They have a huge network all over the world, but they bring bonds for companies anywhere. We have Premier League football clubs. We have the Netflixes of this time. We have Formula One teams which are financing or doing additional financing with us. It's incredible. It makes you very proud if you see the real list.
It's fascinating altogether. And you mentioned this intriguing makeup. Thank you, John Folk, for that question. It's a really interesting point. You mentioned this sort of interesting makeup of your actual investor base, because you've got quite a large coterie. I mean, I think it started out of the wealthy people who are actually clustered in the Channel Islands and then moved its way out across the world. But you have this fascinating nexus of both traditional kinds of capital and investors in particularly bonds, and also large high net worth individuals, family offices, etc., if I understand correctly.
Yes, yeah. But as you, and we will talk about it maybe a bit later, I think even that is moving, because technology, the new world standards, etc., you see that actually also other kind of segments other than pension funds, family office, and high net worth are getting into private structures and private money initiatives, and even here in the Channel Islands. But you're right, it started from that point, and it's a very kind of strong foundation actually we built. But the world is moving fast at the moment. It's incredible. I don't have to tell you that.
The world is moving very, very fast, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to watch a couple of videos in just a second, but I've got one quick question for you while the team tee those up. So, Cees, I'm curious, just explain to us in this part of the nuts and bolts, how then do your bonds and instruments settle? Do they go into a specific CSD, or is it more open in terms of how they're dealt with?
More open to dealt with. Can be both. So
okay.
It depends a little bit on the one who's structuring and guiding the listings and advising the issuer. Some issuers would like to be in Crest. Some issuers don't.
Right. So you basically offer them the choice, whatever they want to do in terms of how they want to be registered or ultimately CSD'd. Very interesting, a very flexible product.
Which potentially brings us, if the CSDR regulations is kicking into Europe, gives us potentially an edge for those issuers who don't know us, and they could come to our market and avoid, to be registered in a CSD.
Yes. That's a very, very interesting point for you altogether. And actually, that sort of spurs in one question. You mentioned earlier on the fact that obviously the Channel Islands are not in Europe, although continentally, I mean, in terms of where they are geographically, they are in the greater continent, but they're not in the European Union. What exactly is the relationship between the financial markets of Guernsey and the European Union on a do-your exchange?
Now we built a great relationship. First of all, we are very close to the City of London. Our promotional body, Guernsey Finance, also has a seat in the city of the UK. So we talk to them almost on a daily basis, and obviously we as TISE have the benefits from there. But we also, for instance, together with Jersey, we have an office in Brussels. We build a relationship there also on a daily basis, and that just that brings understanding. Building networks and relationships on that level, even with the Channel Islands, is bringing benefits for all of us. It's just business.
It's just business, and that's such a good thing to hear about the relationship that you have with Europe, and obviously the very, very strong ties to the UK. Now, I'm going to let you gather your thoughts and have a drink for a second. We're going to move on to the future after this, but first of all, it's that time in the show where we allow our guest a little bit of a chance for some respite. Let's go to a video, ladies and gentlemen. We've got two videos coming up today. The first one, I want to talk about this IT Mega 3. They're really, really fascinating. These are the stocks that are transforming the top end of the US listed stock market environment. Without further ado, let's try that video. Meanwhile, in Big World, Apple is a $3 trillion stock, and Nvidia has recently surpassed it, originally while this video was being recorded. However, the Mac maker and the AI chip manufacturer are only the second and third largest stocks on NASDAQ. Microsoft is roughly $3.15 trillion, which sounds barely bigger than the other two until you consider that the difference is equivalent to the market capitalization of Philip Morris. In fact, less than 50 stocks, 10% of the S&P 500, in other words, are worth more than 150 billion, the market capitalization differential right now between Apple or Nvidia and Microsoft. Take these three massive stocks and compare them to the rest of the world, and it's a graphic example of how simply enormous the US stock market is in comparison to the rest of the world. To put that in perspective, any of the three largest companies on NASDAQ are essentially equivalent to the market capitalization of the entire London stock market. For more in Big World, like or follow. Meanwhile, in Big World, Apple. And there we are, ladies and gentlemen, the first one. Actually, let's go straight into the second video, because I think that's quite interesting to talk about the relative values, as I was teasing earlier on, in relation to Europe and the top three stocks in America. Meanwhile, in Big World, it's the era of the mega IT3. Apple surpassed Microsoft this week as the most valuable company on the US stock market. Its valuation is $3.32 trillion as I record this Monday, 17th of June. Microsoft is worth $3.3 trillion. In third place is the year's massive mover, chipmaker Nvidia at $3.22 trillion. Combined, those three shares have a valuation of $9.84 trillion. What says you we're soon going to have a $10 trillion trio of IT3 mega stocks at the top of the stock market? That will amount to roughly 1/10 of all stock market listed companies in the world. Just for illustrative purposes, each of these companies is worth more than the entire annual gross domestic product of the United Kingdom, the world's sixth largest economy. For more in Big World, like or follow. Wow, quite incredible numbers altogether. And actually, we're at, as I speak, that's what I was doing, looking at my computer, $9.96 trillion. Those three companies are worth right at this moment. So I think the $10 trillion trio is coming very, very soon from those IT Mega 3. Cees, it's obviously a very different world, although it's still in the exchange business. But for all we talk about the super hyper liquid, mega incredible public market stocks of today, there's a huge amount of excitement going on in the world of private markets. What do you think about what's happening in there?
Yes, I think that was something which has been detected already a few years ago in certain parts of the world. We have seen that actually private money, the amount of private money grew tremendously, but also the capability of using IT and systems actually put, I think, all the traditional kind of capital markets actually in the spotlight. And people are overthinking, how we could do that better and find more, opportunities and access illiquid kind of opportunities. And I think that is what created the potential demand and also the drive in order to open up private markets or private equity for not only, as we mentioned before, high net worth pension funds or family offices, but also for a broader kind of audience. And that is what you see today, and it's everywhere. We from TISE have been testing that market. We have been having hundreds of interviews over the last 2.5, 3 years. And we decided 1.5 years, 2 years ago, to develop a private market proposition ourselves from the Channel Islands, which is a less regulated entity where you can, in order to explain, I mentioned many times an exchange in a box, which we give to an issuing company, or we give to a portfolio holder, whether it's a family office or it's a private equity company who's managing several private entities with a number of investors around it. And you can manage your administration. It's a registry. You can schedule and communicate. You can communicate with your holders or new investors. You can schedule auctions or liquidity events. And we also made arrangements for risk-free cash settlements procedures where we just swap money and shares and update the registers in a kind of split of a second. And that is what we did. So we have a completely disintermediated private market platform we can offer to any company or any portfolio holder in the world.
That's a very interesting proposal also, because actually one of the things that people don't think about when it comes to private markets, I think, or at least doesn't get a lot of publicity, is the very, very different covenants that owners of stock can have. I mean, the family business that's been in the same family, whether they're in Alderney or they're in London or they're in, I don't know, Nijmegen or somewhere, the issue there is essentially they've held the stock since forever, and some point in time, granddad decides he wants to sell his stock, or grandson has inherited and wants to sell his stock. Pretty easy. But obviously where you've had companies that have had venture rounds and things like that, the paperwork can be incredibly difficult, and often it's ended up falling into the kind of exchange platform to sort that paperwork out. Whereas actually it's the company itself which best knows what the status is, whether there is some sort of a pre-validation required for buyers, whether there's a case of you have to have preemptive offering to the other sellers. So therefore your solution obviously tries to help that along by essentially giving agency to the companies or the investors themselves.
Exactly. This is exactly, and I think, by listening carefully, I think we came up with this solution, and it's just a start of an I think personally a very exciting journey, and it goes much more beyond than just creating a platform for private companies. I just mentioned that it's open for any company in the world. You're right, there are regulatory differences, and we have to be careful here. But we build it technically in the cloud. That means that technically we could, the world is our market. But obviously we focus mainly, and that is for this time after delivering is enough. We focus on the Channel Islands and the UK. And I just give an example, Patrick, if I may. If you look at the UK today, there's a workforce of 33 million people, and of which 27.5 million people are actually employed by private companies. The UK has 19,148 privately owned companies with more than 100 employees. So you talk about sizable private companies. This almost 20,000 privately owned companies is more than 16 times the size of the quoted sector.
Yeah.
So let's still talk about business, and over the last 10 years in the UK economy, the UK economy has added over 3,000 companies of this kind of category, while we have seen actually a decrease of 270 companies from the quoted market. So for me and for my team here is that it's clear that the UK is becoming a private company economy, and we have to dive into that and to provide services for them, because there's obviously no need, no necessity, and no appetite in order to go to the stock markets anymore, in order to access capital markets. So we need to use technology and more clever kind of mechanisms in order to be able to grow and to prosper, private company without going to a market, and to attract investors in, and to deal with, the shareholder structure, etc., in a more clever way. And that's what we did. It's not more difficult than that, because you're right. if you now want to transfer, if you're looking for a liquidity event in a private company, you want to sell your stock, you have to go to the management who's not equipped in order to deal with these kind of issues. They have to find a counterparty. Then they have to hire a lawyer in order to make the exchange possible. Then you have to deliver and to find your stock certificates. Then you have to find the money and get the money. That takes weeks or even months.
Yeah.
With all the potential defaults in between. It's not different than in 1920 of the last century,
No.
how that is going. So I think we found, at least basically, following the proven kind of technologies and procedures we know, and disintermediated kind of mechanism where you can actually register, trade, exchange, and take care of the transfer of money and the stocks and have your register updated. So we run actually privately a CSD for the companies, and they run their own market.
Yeah, and I think you're onto a great winner there, because actually I think the registry CSD market in this private sector is absolutely enormous, and it's way more than I think one firm can manage to take, even when you're just taking relatively small areas of the world. I mean, that's not to demean the United Kingdom, 6th largest economy in the world, and the Channel Islands are vastly wealthy and have a huge number of companies just within their orbit to start with. But it has a huge possibility, because actually we're seeing with ongoing inheritance a lot of other people around the world essentially leaving the situation where we've got very, very complex shareholder arrangements. I mean, 100 years ago, I think the number of shareholder companies, they were either public and very large, or they were mostly relatively small with a few family shareholders or whatever. But as you say, a lot of these companies that are employing 1,000 people or so, yeah, one of them, they may be concentrated at 1, 2, 3 people, but a lot of them have got quite a few shareholders, enough to make the moving parts difficult to administer.
Yeah. We have, and we launched late last year, and we have a fantastic first client at this moment active. That's the biggest kind of garden center company of the UK and the Channel Islands, which is Blue Diamond Group. I think 44, 45 garden centers across the UK. They have 500 shareholders. It has an enterprise value of almost 200 or 300 million. Market cap, if you like. Normally, these kind of companies should go to an exchange in order to be facilitated for stock trading and settlement and attract investors, etc. And now they do it themselves, and they use our systems. And they are very happy with this system, and they help us also to bring it across. And I would just ask you, Patrick, and the audience, keep on following us, because I'm even more excited about the pipeline of companies we are talking to. It's unbelievable what an interest here for this private facility is. And I hope that you're right, but I think we have a winner here.
I think it's fascinating. I think it's really, really fascinating. And it's also a remarkably flat line of service, because you can offer it to all sorts of financial advisors and other people that they can very easily involve themselves, which is something which I think the original CISX Channel Islands Stock Exchange before the TISE did very, very well, in terms of being able to liaise with all manners of law firms as well as investment banks and brokers and so on. And that's quite a key thing. And actually, that brings me very briefly, I'm just going to mention it too, this week's book of the week, which is a classic. It's not quite as classic as Joseph de la Vega's fabulous book, Confusion to Confusiones, from his time on the Amsterdam bourse several hundred years ago. But Fred Schwed Jr.'s Where Are All the Customers' Yachts, written about a famous occasion when he went down to the South Street seaport off Wall Street and couldn't understand why he could see Mr. Morgan's yacht and all of the other bankers' yachts around. This is a great book. It's 80 years old, yet it's actually 85 years old. I think it was 1940 it was first published. Really, really good read. You can get it in paperback in lots of editions, ladies and gentlemen. It's a veritable classic, a fun discussion about Wall Street, and so true today of how the world works. Catch our new book of the week every Saturday in our Exchange Invest weekend. You can subscribe to that for free. And don't forget, of course, particularly in relation to what we're going to be scooping tomorrow in relation to that fascinating mirage of competition, the competitive mirage, that's going to be Exchange Invest tomorrow. You can sign up for your free trial and start a subscription there at exchangeinvest.com. Now, Cees, we're into the final 10-15 minutes of our show today. It's been a really, really interesting discussion. Thank you very, very much, Peter Falk. Interesting to see a coincidence of Falks. We've got a brace of Falks here at this point in time on the show. Wonderful to see. when you look at this all together, I mean, I think some people might be almost bemused up front because I introduced you at the head of the hour as, the boss of the Channel Islands, so the international stock exchange group based in the Channel Islands. But actually, when you start to look at it, I mean, you do have an incredible number of different departments in your department store. Is your expansion going to be merely expanding those, or do you think there are other departments or areas that you're going to be looking to get into in the future?
Well, it is difficult. It is difficult to look into the future and what's going to happen. The world is not as stable as you would like to be in certain aspects, to be honest. But we have to focus very much on where we are strong at today and where we can make the difference. So I don't think we will create or divert too much away from our niche market at the moment. We have a wonderful, very strong team here. By the way, I didn't mention that, but Guernsey is so incredible international and so connected to the world. Even in a team like just over 40, we are working here across Guernsey, Jersey, Dublin and London. We have almost 12 or 13 nationalities working here. They come from everywhere. And this is making Guernsey strong, this entity strong, and moving us forward. Yes, of course, we look very much at London. We look very much at the appetite of the British authorities and the London Stock Exchange Group in order to launch TISE. We don't know if it's going to happen. It appears to be a very political kind of private market initiative. I'm personally convinced with my team that our offering of TISE private market is actually much more tailored to what private companies really want. But that is maybe a growth path. We see ourselves as a Channel Islands entity very much as being strongly connected to the UK economy. And I think we should not divert away from that. And last but not least, we have a lot of American investors. And in a way, also across the Atlantic looks or is actually much smaller than we think. And we see that in our listed instruments. And we see it in the interest, behind, our sponsors and law firms. So God knows what and how, but we do it in a very responsible way, Patrick.
It's a very, very interesting path. And I think actually, I should have probably given as a prelude to that question, asked you, just remind us, roughly the numbers of new issues or listings. Of course, some of them are renewals of bonds and so on. But every year you're bringing on several hundred, if not thousands, more instruments.
No, we do approximately around 1,000. Obviously, it is in our aim and strategy over the coming years in order to scale that up, because what you're good at, you can also increase and just do more with less. Mm-hmm. And this is actually a path we are continuing to go on. So I would love to have 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 per year. The market of listed bonds in Europe in total is about 25,000, 26,000 bond listings on exchanges. And actually, we do only 1,000 per year. So why couldn't we just move that up and play more in the category of Luxembourg or GEM or Vienna, if you like? The problem you see there in general, and that is a kind of a counterweight or a move you want to make or not, is that the number of issuers you see on these type of markets are very limited compared to our number of issuers. So our market is much more diverse, is much more resilient in terms of income stream, and is much more profitable than what you see on the other big exchanges. So really, do you really want to grow in that kind of category? That's a kind of a question. Then, and that's a debate I have with the senior mm-hmm. team here. Or do we turn around and try to extend our niche behind us towards more cross-Atlantic kind of initiative? We will see.
It's very interesting, certainly, when you mention that, because, while no one can take away from the incredible success of some of your competitors, I don't want to mention them here because it sounds as if I'm comparing one with the other, but certainly one of the worries is you divide them up by the amount of revenue. A very crude measure, the amount of revenue they get per listing. And it's awfully close to nickels and dimes by the time you divide it up just by that pure number, which always worries me. I compliment you hugely on the idea of, 1,000 listings per annum, between 40 people, and you've essentially got 250 working days a year. So you're doing 4 listings a day. That is a quite sensational run rate from start to finish. I mean, it really is. I suppose the only problem you have is you can't invite every single issuer in order to come in and ring the local bell to open or close the market, because otherwise you'd have to be schizophrenic. You'd have to reopen 4 times a day. However, we have got an interesting question here from Anne Berg, our commodities guru. She was also a previous guest. Hi, Anne. Great to hear from you. Thank you for explaining your evolution, your thoughts from public to private markets. They're very thought-provoking. Can you comment on potential societal implications of the shift to a greater emphasis on private markets? Cees.
Yeah, you know, you almost, I don't know if you try to trigger that end, but you almost make me think of Dumb Money, which is a movie I saw in my latest kind of cross-Atlantic flight. I don't want to go there. I think, you know, we are working with professional investors, well informed, coming from every kind of area of the globe. But if you get into private markets, yeah, obviously that is under control of the entities and the companies which are coming on their market, because we don't run them. Otherwise, it wouldn't be private. Undoubtedly, we will have attraction in the future of companies which are using a lot of kind of social kind of engagement and networks in the world in order to try to get their message across. But we have to be careful with that, because I'm personally not a big fan mingling that up in financial markets.
It's a very interesting perspective, Cees, and certainly it's a fascinating opportunity. The one thing I think is wonderful is that you are enabling liquidity onto Main Street in the UK or wherever it is around the world, which is obviously something that's very, very dynamic and good for the economy as a whole. And good grief, possibly the United Kingdom will need it over the course of the next 4 or 5 years. Fascinating altogether. I've just got one tiny question for you. You mentioned all the different outposts of the Channel Islands and the other parts that the International Stock Exchange Group is in. Gosh, can we actually run through them all? Because I seem to remember you've got London, you've got Dublin, you've got actually the Channel Islands themselves, and also I think you've got an outpost in the Isle of Man, another obscure British overseas territory. Is that right?
Everywhere where it's justified and we have sponsors of members or law firms or strong relationships which are supporting to our business, we would like to have someone on the ground. And I'm not denying that, you know, and I mentioned that already, that our aim is also to have that, to even make that connection with London more strong. There's the wholesale market, there's the network, there are decision-making law firms. So we have to build relationships there. We don't have really a regulated entity there. We have people on the ground there, like we had over the last few years in Dublin as well. And that's the way we work. Our offices really are in Guernsey and in Jersey.
Okay. That's very clear. Thank you very much. So, Cees Vermass, there's been a fascinating discussion about how you're taking the International Stock Exchange from the Channel Islands to the world. Let me ask you the question that we always ask at this juncture. Where do you think, Cees Vermass, the capital market revolution goes next?
Well, obviously, I'm a technology kind of fanatic from the foundation and the basis of my education. That is going to change a lot and makes much more possible. And then I think, you know, the unlocking of the private potential, that is the way to go.
Thank you very, very much, Cees. And actually, I'm going to introduce a final comment from the first folk of today's discussion, John Folk. My thanks to Cees and you, Patrick, for the conversation today. Jersey is the better island, though. I grew up in Jersey as a teenager. It's just local island rivalry. There you go. That's the view from John Folk in Brussels these days. Thank you very, very much, John. And indeed, John's father, a fabulous memoir I read about him very recently. Thank you for that, John. It was a great read from start to finish. So, that lays our show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very, very much, Cees Vermass, for being a fantastic guest as we understand much, much better the very, very interesting intricacy of the International Stock Exchange Group, how that's coming together with private markets, its bond market, all of the opportunities, 1,000 new listings a year on average, ladies and gentlemen. That's 4 every working day. Quite sensational altogether, and all managed with a staff of 40 people throughout its many different hubs. We're not going to have a show next week because we are working on an unbelievable number of things, and unfortunately, the gods were not propitious, ladies and gentlemen, so we won't be around live next week. However, got some interesting announcements for you the week after, so stay tuned in the first week of July. that's going to be a very, very exciting week for both PLY and Exchange Invest. Don't forget to pick up our scoop tomorrow in exchangeinvest.com, all about that fabulous, interesting mirage that we're looking at in terms of competition. And it only remains for me to say thank you very, very much to our fabulous different guests and speakers today, not just Cees Vermass, who's been our extra special guest, but also to John Falk, Lot Kaiser, Peter Falk, and Anne Berg. And I want to say thank you very, very much to Herminia, Marianne, and Mary for being a super production galley today. We're going to be back in a couple of weeks' time, ladies and gentlemen. In the meantime, have a fantastic week or 2 weeks in life and markets. My name is Patrick L. Young. I'll catch you at the Bourse Business Water Cooler, the exchange of information, Exchange Invest Daily.